My mom said over dessert, "I wish you were never born." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I set my fork down beside the untouched slice of cheesecake in front of me, looked around the table at the people who had called themselves my family for 30 years, and felt something inside me go completely still. My name is Camila. I was 30 years old when I finally disappeared from a family that had never truly seen me in the first place. It happened over dessert, the part of the night that was supposed to be sweet. My mother's words sliced through the cheerful clinking of forks against plates. "I wish you were never born." Then came the laughter. It was sharp, ugly, and immediate. My older brother Lucas let out a booming laugh that filled the restaurant. My younger sister Emily hid her smirk behind her wine glass, but I could still see it in her eyes. Even my father, my own father, chuckled into his napkin, as if my mother had just delivered the funniest line of the evening. I did not laugh. I felt heat rush into my cheeks, a burning blush of humiliation that spread under my skin. But on the outside, I stayed composed. I made myself smile. It was faint and thin, more like a crack in ice than an actual expression. Then I said, in a voice that surprised even me with how steady it sounded, "I guess you'll love what I'm about to do next." The room went silent. It was a glass-shattering kind of stillness, the kind that makes every breath feel too loud. Every eye turned toward me. They looked confused at first, then annoyed, as if I had ruined the punchline by refusing to perform my part correctly. That was the moment I stopped being their joke. In my family, I was the responsible one. That was what they called me, usually with a sigh that was part relief and part dismissal. It sounded like a compliment if you did not listen closely. It sounded like a badge of honor, like I was dependable and strong and trusted. But it was never really a compliment. Responsible was just a prettier word for invisible. It meant I was the one who did not need anything. I was the one who did not want anything. I was the one who did not cause trouble, make demands, fall apart, or require attention. I was the sturdy, plain foundation beneath everyone else's more exciting, chaotic, and important lives. I was the free babysitter for Lucas's kids on Friday nights. I was the silent errand runner when my mother remembered 2 hours before a dinner party that she had forgotten candles, flowers, dessert, or some specific imported cheese. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, everyone's anniversaries, everyone's school recitals, doctor appointments, and deadlines. For my own birthday, I usually got a store-bought cake, picked up by me on my way home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. My life was a landscape of quiet competence, lived mostly under the harsh, sterile lights of St. Jude's Hospital. I was a trauma nurse. My days were measured in beeping machines, whispered consultations, blood pressure alarms, rushing footsteps, and the sharp metallic smell of blood. I was good at my job. I could insert an IV into a rolling vein in a moving ambulance. I could perform CPR until my arms screamed with exhaustion. I could look a devastated family in the eye and tell them their loved one was gone, with a compassion that was both gentle and firm. In the emergency room, I was seen. I was necessary. My skills mattered. I would finish a shift with my body aching and my mind numb from the emotional weight of everything I had witnessed, and still, I would feel a deep sense of purpose. I saved lives. I mattered. Then I would walk through the automatic doors of the hospital, step back into the ordinary world, drive 20 minutes to my parents' house for Sunday dinner, and all of that would vanish. I would become Camila again, the responsible one, the background character. My older brother Lucas was the golden child. He was a financial advisor who wore sharp suits that cost more than my monthly rent, and he had a loud, confident laugh that filled every room, until every other conversation had to make space for him. Everything Lucas did was treated like a monumental achievement. When he made partner at his firm, my parents threw a party that cost more than my first car. They framed the newspaper announcement and hung it in the center of the living room wall. When his wife Sarah had their first son, you would have thought a royal heir had been born. Lucas could do no wrong. I remembered the time he forgot his 5th wedding anniversary. Sarah was devastated, and she had every right to be. My phone buzzed at 6 in the evening. It was a frantic string of texts from Lucas. "Cammy, I messed up big time. It's my anniversary. I forgot. Sarah's crying." A moment later, another message arrived. "You're good at this stuff. What do I do?" I had just sat down to my first real meal in 2 days. It was nothing special, just a simple bowl of soup, but I had been looking forward to it because I was exhausted and hungry and finally alone. I sighed, pushed the bowl aside, and opened a browser on my phone. An hour later, a bouquet of 24 roses, a spa gift certificate, and a reservation at the city's most romantic restaurant had all been secured. All of it was paid for with my credit card. The card attached to the flowers said, "To my one and only, all my love, Lucas." He texted me a simple, "Thanks, Cammy, you are a lifesaver." He promised to pay me back. He never did. A week later at Sunday dinner, Sarah was glowing as she showed off the diamond earrings Lucas had surprised her with. She hugged me and said, "You should find a guy like your brother, Camila. He's so thoughtful." I just smiled. My younger sister Emily was the creative spirit. That was how my family described her, which mostly meant she was professionally flaky and emotionally volatile. She floated through life on a cloud of vague promises, artistic temperament, and unpaid invoices. She forgot birthdays, she missed important events, she was always in some kind of financial crisis. But every failure, every selfish choice, every broken promise was forgiven with a wave of my mother's hand. "That's just Emily," my mother would say with an indulgent smile. "You can't put a free spirit in a box." So we did not put Emily in a box. We just paid for the box, the art supplies that went into it, and the rent on the studio where she kept it. Her crises were legendary. I would get calls at 3 a.m. from a sobbing Emily, convinced she was a fraud and that her artistic vision had abandoned her forever. I would have a shift in 3 hours. My alarm would already be set for the brutal hour of 4:45 a.m. But I would stay on the phone anyway, my voice low and soothing, talking her down from the ledge of her own self-drama. "Your work has value, Em. You have a unique voice." I would murmur the encouragements, the platitudes, the exact phrases she needed to hear, while my own exhaustion pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. She would soak up the validation, breathe easier, then finally say, "Oh my God, what time is it? You probably have work. Sorry. Thanks, Cammy. You're the best." Then she would hang up. I would be left staring at the ceiling, my chance for sleep gone, my body already aching in anticipation of the long day ahead. And then there was me, Camila, the nurse, the one who lived in a small, clean apartment 20 minutes away. My home was my sanctuary, the only place where I did not have to be anyone's support system. I decorated it in calm shades of gray and blue. In the corner of the living room, I kept a thriving fiddle-leaf fig tree that I was immensely proud of. My life was orderly and quiet. I paid my bills on time. I had a small savings account that I added to carefully with every paycheck. By every reasonable measure, I was a successful, independent adult. But in my family's world, my success was boring. My independence was not a virtue. It was a convenience. It meant I did not need anything, so they did not have to give anything. My stability was not something to celebrate. It was something to use. I was the family's sturdy, reliable human safety net. They called me when a car broke down when they needed someone to watch the kids when a bill was overdue and they were a little short that month. I always said yes. I always fixed it. I always paid. I told myself that if I was useful enough, helpful enough, responsible enough, one day they would finally see me. They would see the person behind the function I served. I brought pies to family dinners and hoped someone would ask about my day. They would say, "This is delicious, Cammy," but they never said, "You look tired." Was it a hard shift? The pie was seen. The person who brought it was not. I remember one particular Tuesday. I had just finished a brutal weekend of double shifts. A multi-car pileup on the freeway had flooded the emergency room, and I had barely slept in 48 hours. I was bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that seeps past your body and into your soul. All I wanted was to crawl into bed and sleep for a decade. My phone rang as I was unlocking my apartment door. It was my mother. "Cammy, sweetie, thank God you picked up," she said, her voice already spinning with manufactured panic. "I'm in a terrible bind. The caterer for the foundation dinner tonight just called. They forgot the dessert platters. Can you run to that little French bakery you like and pick up an assortment of pastries? A big assortment?" I leaned my forehead against my door. The cool wood was a small comfort. "Mom, I just got home from a double. I haven't slept." My voice was flat with exhaustion. There was a pause. Not a sympathetic pause. An impatient one. "Oh, right. Well, this will only take an hour tops. You can sleep after. It's for your father's big charity event. It's important. He's the guest of honor." It was always important. Someone else was always important. My exhaustion. My need for rest. My health. My body. My peace. None of it was ever as important as the family's latest manufactured crisis. The unspoken message was clear. My work was just a job. Their social standing was a legacy. So I said what I always said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Okay, Mom, I'll do it. I did not go to bed. I went to the French bakery. I spent over $200 of my own money on eclairs, fruit tarts, and macarons, because I knew my mother would forget to pay me back and asking would make me seem petty. I carefully drove them to the fancy hotel downtown, my hands shaking slightly from fatigue. I navigated through the service entrance, a world away from the glittering ballroom, and handed the heavy boxes to a grateful event coordinator. I never got a thank you from my mother or my father. I saw them from the doorway across the massive room. They were laughing with the mayor. My father held a glass of champagne. My mother looked radiant in a new gown. They were the stars of the show. I was just the invisible stagehand making sure the props were in place. Driving home, the city lights blurred through my tired eyes. I felt that familiar ache in my chest, a hollow space where appreciation should have been. For 30 years, I had been playing my part perfectly, because on some deep, childish level, I believed it was the only way to earn their love. I was beginning to understand that I was not earning love. I was sustaining a transaction. Being fine was the loneliest word in the world. It was a label they had given me early, a convenient excuse to look away, a permission slip to focus their attention on the squeakier wheels of Lucas and Emily. Camila will handle it. She's fine. Don't worry about Camila. She's always fine. It was not a compliment about my resilience. It was a dismissal of my needs. And the proof was everywhere, scattered throughout my life, like a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to the same empty place where my achievements went to die. The first time I truly understood it, the first time the word fine felt like a slap, I was 14. Science was my refuge in the messy, unpredictable world of my family. The clear rules and predictable outcomes of chemistry and biology comforted me. I had spent 3 months hunched over petri dishes and research papers for the regional science fair. My project was on antibiotic resistance in common household bacteria, a topic I found endlessly fascinating. I poured all of my quiet, intense focus into it, culturing samples in my bedroom until it smelled like a strange mix of bleach and damp earth. My parents barely registered what I was doing. My father would ruffle my hair and say, "Still playing with germs, kiddo." My mother would wrinkle her nose and say, "Camila, whatever that is, it's starting to smell up the whole hallway." The day of the fair was a blur of nervous energy. I stood beside my trifold poster board and explained my methodology to a series of stern-faced judges. I loved it. I loved the precision. I loved the knowledge. I loved the feeling of being an expert in my own small corner of the universe. When they called my name for first place in the senior division, I felt a shockwave of pure joy. It was physical, a lightness in my chest that made me feel as if I could float. I walked onto the stage, shook the superintendent's hand, and accepted the large, gaudy blue ribbon and the small, heavy trophy. For the first time, I felt truly seen. I practically vibrated with excitement on the bus ride home, clutching my trophy in both hands. This, I thought, this they will have to see. This is not just fine, this is exceptional. I burst through the front door. "I'm home! You won't believe what happened!" The house was tense. I found my parents in the living room. My mother was on the phone, her voice tight with anguish. My father was pacing the length of the oriental rug, his hands shoved in his pockets, his face dark with anger. A real-life crisis was in progress. Lucas, away at a prestigious boarding school my parents could barely afford, had been caught with a few friends drinking beer in the woods behind the dorms. He was being suspended for a week. I stood in the doorway with my ribbon and trophy, suddenly feeling cheap and silly. I waited for a pause in the drama. Finally, my mother hung up and burst into tears. I cleared my throat. "Mom, Dad, I won first place." My mother waved a frantic, dismissive hand at me, her face buried in a tissue. "Not now, Camilla. For heaven's sake, can't you see we're dealing with something serious? Your brother could be expelled." My father stopped pacing long enough to glower at me, as if I were the source of the interruption. "That's nice, honey. Just put it on the shelf somewhere. We have to figure out what to do about Lucas. A real crisis." My victory was not real. It was a trifle, an inconvenient distraction from the grand opera of Lucas's teenage misbehavior. The soaring feeling inside my chest collapsed into a dense, heavy knot. I quietly backed out of the room. I walked to the built-in bookcase in the hallway, a shrine to my family's priorities. It was filled with Lucas's sports trophies, gleaming gold figures for soccer, baseball, and track, along with a few of Emily's more successful pottery projects from elementary school. I found a small, dusty space behind a large MVP award from Lucas's sophomore year and placed my little plastic trophy there. It was almost completely hidden. Just like me. I went to my room, closed the door, and never said another word about it. The next week, Lucas came home. His punishment consisted of my parents cooking his favorite meals and spending hours talking to him about his future and the pressures of being a young man. My science fair was never mentioned again. 4 years later, the pattern repeated itself, only sharper and more painful. I received my acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins's nursing program, one of the best in the country. It was my absolute dream school, a goal I had worked toward relentlessly while balancing a brutal schedule of AP classes with a part-time job waiting tables so I could save money for application fees. I remembered holding the thick envelope with trembling hands. This was it, the key to a life of my own, a life of purpose. I decided to wait until dinner to tell them. I wanted it to be a moment. I imagined proud smiles, a celebratory toast, maybe even a special dessert. I sat through the meal with my heart thrumming, waiting for the right opening. Finally, as my mother was clearing the plates, I pulled the letter from my pocket. "I have some news," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got in." I slid the letterhead across the table. My father picked it up and glanced at it. "Johns Hopkins, huh? Good for you, Cam. We knew you would. You're a smart kid." He folded the letter and handed it back to me. Then he turned to Lucas. "So, did you get the summer internship at the mayor's office?" My mother paused on her way to the kitchen and kissed the air near my cheek. "That's wonderful, dear. A nurse. Such a practical, steady job. We won't have to worry about you." Then she continued into the kitchen, and the conversation immediately shifted to Lucas's internship, Lucas's prospects, Lucas's future. I sat there with the acceptance letter feeling like a dead weight in my hand. They were not proud. They were relieved. I had chosen a path that would not require their help, their worry, or their money. I had made myself easy to ignore. 2 months later, Lucas graduated high school. He had scraped by with a C average and gotten the internship only because my father was golf buddies with the mayor. To celebrate this stunning achievement, my parents threw a massive backyard barbecue. They rented tents and hired a caterer. As a graduation gift, they bought him a car, a brand new cherry red convertible he had wanted since he was 16. I watched from the kitchen window as my father tossed him the keys. Lucas whooped with joy, and my mother hugged him with actual tears of pride in her eyes. The unfairness of it was so staggering that it felt like a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs. I got a verbal pat on the head. He got a party and a car. Years passed, and Emily became the new focus of their parental investment. After dropping out of 2 different colleges, she declared herself a painter. My parents, who had always stressed the importance of a stable career to me, suddenly became passionate patrons of the arts. One evening I came over for dinner and found them uncharacteristically serious. I had just finished telling them how my 10-year-old sedan was on its last legs, how the repair bills were piling up, and how I was worried about getting to work reliably. My father had looked grim and said money was tight. I would have to figure it out on my own. I nodded, of course. I always figured it out. But that night, their tone was different. "Camila," my father started steepling his fingers, "your mother and I have had a long talk. We believe in supporting our children's dreams." My mother nodded, her eyes shining. "We're giving Emily a launch fund to start her art studio. We want to give her a real shot at making it." The number was $20,000. The words caught in my throat. $20,000! Just weeks after they had told me they could not help with a down payment on a reliable, safe car for me to get to my job where I saved actual human lives. The shock must have been obvious on my face because my mother's expression softened with a hint of pity. "Oh, sweetie, don't look like that. It's different. Emily is pursuing art. It's a calling. You have a trade. A very respectable one, of course. But you don't need help. You're fine." There it was again, that word. Fine. It was a cage they had built for me, and I had willingly locked myself inside. Being fine meant I got nothing. It meant I was strong enough to carry my own weight, so they felt comfortable adding everyone else's weight to my shoulders, too. My strength was not a virtue to them. It was a resource to be exploited. And as I sat there, listening to them plan Emily's dream, while my own needs went completely unacknowledged, I realized that I was not just the forgotten daughter. I was the one funding the remembering of everyone else. The dinner where everything finally broke was supposed to be a celebration. That was the official story, anyway, proclaimed on the glittery, hand-lettered invitations Emily had designed herself. We were celebrating the grand opening of her art gallery, Etheria, a small, chic space in a newly gentrified part of town, where exposed brick and Edison bulbs commanded astronomical rent. I knew the exact figure, of course, because the first 3 months' deposit, a staggering 5-figure sum, had been transferred directly from my savings account. On the day of the dinner, I stood in front of my closet with the invitation sitting on my dresser. I felt a familiar, weary dread mixed with a stubborn, stupid flicker of hope. I had told myself the money for Emily was a loan, a lie so thin it was almost transparent, but I had also let myself believe it was an investment in something more than her gallery. Maybe it was an investment in my own visibility. Maybe tonight, surrounded by her success, a success I had secretly bankrolled, they would finally see me. Maybe my contribution, however hidden, would somehow radiate outward and make me real to them. Before leaving my apartment, I sat at my small desk and made one last transfer. It was for the gallery's electricity bill, which Emily had tearfully called me about that morning. She said she had totally forgotten, and the power was about to be shut off hours before her opening party. "You're the best, Cammy. I'll pay you back next week, I promise." She chirped the promise before hanging up. I clicked confirm and watched my savings account balance dip again. It felt like a secret ritual. A bitter offering at the altar of my family's happiness. I chose a simple, elegant black dress as my armor. It was understated and professional, like me. When I arrived at the restaurant, a trendy, loud place with a menu I knew for a fact my parents could not afford, the celebration was already in full swing. My parents were at the head of a long table holding court. My mother wore a new silk dress, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to my muted black. My father was telling Lucas a booming story about a recent golf game, his voice drowning out everyone else. Emily, of course, was the star. She glowed in a bohemian-style dress, accepting toasts and praise with the practiced grace of someone who had never known anything else. My father raised his wineglass high. To Emily, he said the crystal catching a light, who had the courage to follow her passion and create something truly beautiful. We are so, so proud. Everyone cheered. I raised my glass too. The forced smile on my face felt tight and brittle. Courage, I thought, bitterness rising in my throat. It is easy to have courage when someone else is paying your bills. I tried to catch Emily's eye, hoping for a small, conspiratorial glance, some silent acknowledgement of our secret, but she was already looking past me, waving at a friend across the room. The conversation swirled around me in a dizzying vortex. Emily, Emily's art, Emily's gallery, Emily's brilliant future, Emily's insightful interview with a local art blogger. I sat there like a ghost at the feast, pushing a piece of salmon around my plate. I tried to join in, to find a foothold in the conversation. When my mother mentioned how stressful the opening had been, I saw a small opening. "I can only imagine," I said. "Things get so intense when you're responsible for other people." At the hospital last week, Emily cut me off with a light, tinkling laugh. "Oh my God, Mom. Speaking of intense, you should have seen the caterer I had to deal with. A total nightmare." The conversation veered back to her, and I was left in the wake of my sentence trailing off into silence. Later, I tried with Lucas. "How are the kids?" I asked. "Does Michael still love that science kit I got him?" I had spent a lot of time picking it out, remembering my own childhood love for experiments. "They're fine," he said, his eyes already scanning the room. "Hey, Dad, did you see the quarterly earnings report from Sterling Corp? Unbelievable." He turned his back to me completely and leaned in to talk stocks with our father. Fine. The kids were fine. I was fine. Everyone they did not want to think about was fine. Then the jokes started. They were always at my expense. Little digs disguised as affectionate teasing, designed to reinforce my role as the boring, sensible one, against which their sparkling lives could be measured. "We should get Emily to paint your portrait," Camila Lucas said with a smirk, turning back to me now that he had an audience. She could call it "Woman Married to Her Stethoscope." My father chuckled. "She'd have to get you to stand still for 5 minutes first. Always running around that one. Work, work, work." "It's the scrubs," Emily added, waving her fork theatrically. "They're just not inspiring. So beige." They all laughed. It felt like they were throwing pebbles at me, small and insignificant one by one, but collectively bruising. I sat there stirring the foam on my cappuccino, the smile on my face feeling more and more like a mask made of cracking plaster. My stability was a joke to them. My independence was a character flaw. I decided to try one last time to share something real, something that mattered, something that proved my life was more than beige. Actually, I said, my voice a little louder than I intended, it was a pretty incredible week at work. We had a patient, a construction worker, who came in with a piece of rebar through his chest. It was a miracle it missed his heart by a centimeter. I could picture the trauma bay, the controlled chaos, the incredible ballet of doctors and nurses working as one. I was the one who spotted the internal bleeding on the ultrasound. We had to get him into the OR in under 5 minutes. It took a team of 6 of us 4 hours to stabilize him. I remembered the intense, focused silence, the smell of antiseptic, and the incredible soaring feeling when the surgeon finally said, "He's going to make it." I had saved a man's life. It was the opposite of beige. It was life and death painted in colors they could not even imagine. I looked around the table, hoping for a flicker of interest, awe, or anything. My mother only glanced at me, her nose wrinkling in distaste. "Oh, Camilla, please," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Not while we're eating. It's so morbid, and honestly, a bit of an attention grab." Then she immediately turned back to Emily, her face softening into a beatific smile. "Now, Em, tell your father about the critic from the Art Gazette who stopped by." And just like that, I was erased. My story, my work, my entire world were dismissed as a morbid attention-seeking ploy. A man's life hanging in the balance was less important than the opinion of a local blogger. The knot in my stomach tightened into a ball of ice. By the time dessert arrived, a fancy platter of miniature pastries I knew I would probably end up paying for through another secret transfer to my mother's account, I had retreated into complete silence. That was when my mother, flushed with wine and pride for her 2 golden children, looked at me. Maybe she saw the flicker of pain in my eyes. Maybe she saw that the mask had finally crumbled. Or maybe she just wanted to land the final killing blow and win the night. She sighed dramatically, a theatrical, mournful sound, and reached over to pat my hand with her cold fingers. "You know," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole table to hear, "sometimes I just think life would have been so much simpler." She paused for comedic effect. "I wish you were never born." It was meant to be the ultimate punchline, and to them it was hilarious. Lucas roared with laughter, slapping the table so hard the water glasses jumped. Emily covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with mirth. Even my father let out a deep rumbling chuckle and shook his head, as if to say my mother was such a card. But I did not laugh. In that one brutal moment, the whole world stopped. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of the restaurant, the beating of my own heart, all of it went silent. All I could hear was their laughter. The sound of my entire family laughing at the idea of my non-existence. They were not just dismissing my achievements anymore. They were dismissing my very being. And in their laughter, I heard the cold, hard truth of 30 years. I was not the responsible one. I was not the forgotten one. I was the disposable one. A fire started in my chest. It was not a hot, raging inferno of anger that screams and throws things. It was a cold, quiet burn, the kind that turns wood to steel. It was the precise, controlled flame of a sterilized scalpel. It crept up my throat, a feeling so intense it should have made me choke, but it never reached my face. My expression remained placid, almost serene. I had spent a lifetime learning how to hide my feelings, how to present a calm and competent exterior, no matter what chaos was unfolding inside me. That skill, born from neglect, now became my greatest weapon. It became my armor. I looked at each of them, my gaze moving slowly around the table like a dispassionate observer cataloging specimens. Lucas wiping a tear of authentic laughter from his eye. Emily preening under the attention, her smile a beautiful, cruel slash of red lipstick. My father, blissfully unaware, chuckling along to keep the peace and the mood light. My mother, the architect of the moment, smiling proudly at her witty, devastating remark. They looked like a perfect family, a portrait of joy, a joy built on the casual public execution of my spirit. They thought I would cry. They thought I would protest. Or they thought I would absorb it as I always had. They were waiting for me to play my part. The hurt daughter, the wet blanket. Instead, I picked up my fork, which was still resting beside my untouched cheesecake. I held it lightly between my thumb and forefinger. I smiled. It was not the pained, people-pleasing smile they were used to. This one was different. It did not reach my eyes. It was sharp at the edges. When I spoke, my voice was perfectly even. It did not tremble. It did not rise. It was as calm and sterile as the operating rooms where I spent my days, where panic was a death sentence. I met my mother's eyes directly. I guess you'll love what I'm about to do." The laughter died instantly. It was as if I had pulled the plug on a stereo and plunged the entire table into sudden, shocked silence. Lucas's smile faltered, replaced by confused irritation. Emily's hand froze on its way to her wineglass, her painted nails hovering in the air. My father's face clouded over with the vague disapproval he reserved for any breach of social etiquette. They did not understand what I meant. Of course they did not. In their world, I did not do things. I was a resource, not an actor. I was the person things were done to. I was the recipient of their jokes, their demands, and their problems. The idea of me taking action, of me having a plan of my own that did not involve them, was so alien that they could not even begin to process it. But I knew exactly what I meant. In that moment of absolute chilling clarity, a plan bloomed in my mind, fully formed and terrifyingly simple. For years, I had been their silent partner, their unacknowledged benefactor, their human ATM. And as I sat there with the echo of their laughter still hanging in the air, a cold, efficient triage of my financial ties to them began scrolling through my mind like a patient's chart. The mortgage. I remembered the day 2 years earlier in the sterile office of the bank. My parents had been turned down for refinancing because their credit was a mess. My father, looking helpless and smaller than I had ever seen him, had said, "Cammy, it's just a formality. We just need your good name on the paperwork. We'll handle everything." I signed. 6 months later, the first late payment call came to me, the cosigner. My mother sighed over the phone. "Things are just so tight, sweetie. Could you just cover it this once?" That once had become a permanent, unacknowledged autopay from my account to theirs on the 28th of every month. The utility bills. I remembered the phone call from my mother a year earlier. "Camila, I just can't figure out all these online passwords and portals. It's a nightmare. You're so good with computers. Would it be easier if we just had them sent to you?" Easier for whom? I had thought even then. But I agreed. For a year, a portion of my paycheck had been siphoned off to keep their lights on and their house warm. Emily's studio. The sisterly investment. I pictured Emily sitting in my apartment crying over a cup of herbal tea about how she would never fulfill her potential without a dedicated space. "It's my dream, Cammy," she had whispered. "I'll pay you back for my first big sale, I swear." I transferred the money. There had been no big sale. Only more requests. My father's car insurance. My premium doubled the day I added him to my policy because he was almost uninsurable on his own. "You're saving my skin, kiddo," he had said, clapping me on the shoulder. He promised to give me the cash for his portion every month. In the last year, he had paid me twice, both times after I awkwardly reminded him. Lucas's son's daycare. He and Sarah were overwhelmed. Their budget was a disaster. It was just a little help, Lucas had said, to get them through a rough patch. That rough patch had lasted 18 months and cost me over $10,000. They thought these were favors. They thought it was just Camilla helping out. They never saw the truth. It was a system. A complex, parasitic financial ecosystem where I was the unwilling host. Piece by piece, they had outsourced the responsibilities of their own lives to me. They did not even have the decency to be grateful. Instead, they mocked the very stability that kept them afloat. Tonight, the host was rejecting the parasites. I pushed my chair back from the table. The legs scraped softly against the polished floor, a sound that felt deafening in the silence. I placed my napkin neatly beside my untouched plate. "Thank you for dessert," I said to the silent, staring table. "I have to get going. Early shift tomorrow." It was a lie. I had the next 3 days off, but they did not know my schedule. They never asked. I turned and walked away without looking back. I could feel their eyes on my back, a mixture of confusion and annoyance. I did not care. The pain that had been a constant dull ache in my chest for 30 years was finally gone. In its place was a strange, cold calm, a sense of absolute purpose. On the drive home, I did not cry. The city lights streaked past my car windows in blurry lines. I replayed the scene at the table, not with pain, but with the detached analysis of a clinician reviewing a case. Diagnosis: terminal toxicity. Prognosis: poor unless radical intervention is performed. Prescription: amputation. When I reached my quiet, orderly apartment, I did not fall apart. I walked in, placed my keys in the small bowl by the door, and made myself a cup of chamomile tea. Then I walked to my desk, sat down, and pulled a thick black binder from the bottom drawer. The label on the spine, printed in my neat handwriting, read, "Family Expenses." The pivot was not just an emotional reaction. It was calculated, documented, and long overdue. And it was about to begin. The drive home had been a silent 20-minute transition between two worlds. I left the loud, clattering restaurant where my existence had been debated as a hypothetical inconvenience, and I entered the quiet sanctuary of my car. The city lights stretched in streams of red and gold, but I saw none of them. My focus had turned inward to a place of absolute crystalline clarity. There were no tears. The time for tears was over. They were a currency I had spent my entire life, and they had purchased me nothing. That night, the emotional well finally ran dry. In its place was a vast, calm desert of resolve. When I arrived at my apartment, the silence that greeted me was not loneliness. It was peace. It was the clean, orderly silence of my own life, a life I had built and paid for myself. I walked in and put my keys in the small ceramic bowl by the door, a piece Emily had made in a pottery class I had paid for. Then I went straight to the kitchen. I did not pour wine. I did not seek comfort in food. I made chamomile tea, moving slowly and deliberately through the ritual. The whistle of the kettle was the only sound, a sharp, clean note in the quiet. Cup in hand, I walked to the small desk in the corner of my living room. I sat down, and without a moment's hesitation, I pulled open the bottom drawer. There it was, a thick, 3-ring binder, heavy and black. The label on the spine, printed from my label maker in a neat, clear font, read, Family Expenses. I had started it about 3 years earlier, not as a weapon, but as a coping mechanism. It was a way to make sense of the constant drain on my finances and my energy. It began as a simple spreadsheet to track the loans I knew would never be repaid, but over time it had evolved. It had become the official record of my invisibility, a silent testament to the 1,000 ways I had been bled dry. Opening it now felt different. It was no longer a sad diary of my own exploitation. It was a manual for my liberation. I placed the binder on the desk and opened it. The pages were divided by neat tabs. Parents, Lucas, Emily. Inside was a meticulous, almost obsessive archive of my family's dependency. Every Venmo transfer was printed out. The memo lines were there in black and white. Studio supplies, you're the best. Daycare help. I had highlighted them in a sickly yellow. Every credit card statement with charges for their groceries, gas, dinners, and emergencies was marked with red pen. There were copies of checks, bank transfer confirmations, and scribbled IOUs on napkins that had been a joke even when they were written. Beside each entry in my small, precise handwriting was a running total. The number was staggering, well into 6 figures. It was a down payment on a house. It was a retirement. It was a life I had given away, piece by piece. For a moment, I only stared at the pages, at the documented weight of my role as the family's secret foundation. There was no anger. The emotion was colder and purer than that. It was the feeling a surgeon must have while looking at an X-ray of a malignant tumor. A clear, objective understanding of what needed to be cut out. I turned on my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated my face. The process was methodical. I was a nurse, executing a protocol following a series of steps with precision and care. First, the mortgage. I logged into my online banking portal and navigated to the bill pay section. My fingers moved quickly and surely across the keyboard. There it was, the recurring monthly payment to my parents' mortgage lender. I remembered the day I had set it up. My mother had been crying over the phone about how the interest rates were killing them and how they might lose the house. "Just for a few months, Cammy," she had pleaded. "Just until your father's commission check comes in." The commission check never came. I clicked Cancel Recurring Payment. A small box popped up. "Are you sure you want to delete this payment series?" I clicked Yes. A green checkmark appeared. The first thread was cut. Next came the utilities. This was more complicated. My mother had been right about one thing. It was a hassle of passwords and portals, but I was the one who had set them all up, so I had the credentials saved in a secure file. I logged into the gas company's website. My credit card was listed as the primary payment method. Remove card. Confirmation box. Yes. I did the same for the electric company, the water company, and the cable and internet bundle. One by one, I erased myself from their basic infrastructure. The lights they read by, the water they showered with, the television they watched. I was no longer paying for any of it. Then Emily. This one was a direct transfer I had scheduled for my savings account. It was due to go out in 3 days on the 1st of the month to her gallery's landlord. I found the scheduled transfer. With a single, satisfying click, it was gone. I thought of her glowing at the restaurant and talking about the courage it took to be an artist. Her courage had a name. It was my savings account. And it was now closed for business. Next was my father's car insurance. This required a phone call. I looked at the clock. It was late, but the 24-hour customer service line was open. I dialed the number and navigated the automated menu. A pleasant-sounding woman answered. "I need to remove a driver from my policy," I said, my voice calm and even. I gave her my father's name and date of birth. "All right, ma'am," she said. "Just so you know, removing this driver will significantly decrease your premium. Your new monthly rate will be..." She told me the number. It was less than half of what I had been paying. The financial cost of my family was no longer abstract. It was concrete, quantifiable. "And when would you like this change to be effective?" she asked. "Immediately," I replied. Finally, Lucas. The daycare. It was a weekly payment made through a childcare app. I opened the app on my phone, went to the payment settings, and removed my bank account information. The next payment was scheduled for Monday. It would not go through. I thought of Lucas, laughing the loudest at my mother's joke. Lucas, the provider. Lucas, the man who had made partner. Lucas, who could not even pay for his own son's childcare without a subsidy from his boring sister. It took less than an hour. In 60 minutes of quiet, methodical clicks, I had dismantled the secret financial architecture that had supported my family for years. I had not acted out of rage. I had not acted out of a desire for revenge. I had acted out of a sudden, profound, unshakable sense of self-preservation. They had laughed at the wish for my non-existence. I had just granted it. I had made myself non-existent in their financial lives. I closed the binder. I shut down the laptop. I rinsed out my teacup and placed it in the dishwasher. My apartment was exactly as it had been when I arrived, but everything was different. The air felt lighter. I felt lighter. The immense, crushing weight of their collective need, a weight I had carried so long I had forgotten it was there, was gone. I went to bed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in years. The floor they stood on had vanished. They just did not know it yet. The silence that followed was strange and beautiful. For 5 days, my phone did not ring with a crisis. There were no breathless calls from my mother about a forgotten appointment, no frantic texts from Emily about a looming deadline, no sheepish voicemails from my father about a bill he could not cover. It was a quiet I had not experienced since I was a child. I spent the days off I was supposed to have. I went for a long walk in the park. I sat in a coffee shop and read a novel for 3 uninterrupted hours. I deep-cleaned my apartment, scrubbing away the old and making space for the new. With every mundane task, I felt a sense of ownership over my own time. The feeling was so new that it was almost exhilarating. I was living my life on my schedule. The absence of their chaos was like a calming balm on a burn I had not realized was constantly searing my skin. The storm broke on Thanksgiving Day. It was a Thursday. I had politely declined my mother's perfunctory invitation to dinner by texting, "Sorry, I'm working." Another lie. A necessary one. In reality, I was sitting on my couch in my pajamas, watching a movie and eating a delicious store-bought rotisserie chicken. It was the most peaceful holiday I had had in a decade. The first text arrived at 3:15 p.m. It was from my mother. "The power just went out. All the neighbors have theirs. Did you pay the electric bill?" I looked at the message on my phone screen. I felt a phantom urge, a conditioned reflex to solve the problem, to call the power company, to smooth things over, to fix it. I took a deep breath, set the phone face down on the cushion beside me, and took another bite of chicken. It was delicious. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Then again. It was a group text with my parents and siblings. From my mother, Camila. "I'm serious. The turkey is half cooked and the house is dark. We have guests coming in an hour. Call me." From my father. "Your mother is very upset. Whatever is going on, you need to fix this now." I continued watching my movie. The hero was just discovering the conspiracy. I was discovering my freedom. My phone began to ring. The screen lit up with my mother's face. I pressed the silence button on the side of the phone and let it go to voicemail. The text became more frantic. From Lucas. "Mom says the power is out. What's going on? Sarah and I are on our way with the kids." From Emily. "OMG. The gallery owner just called me. The rent check bounced. He said he's going to put a lock on the door if he doesn't have it by tomorrow." "Camila, did you forget to pay it?" Another call from my mother. Ignored. A new voicemail. Camila, this isn't funny. This is the most important dinner of the year and you are ruining it. You are being incredibly selfish. Call me back this instant. The tone had shifted from confusion to irritation to outright anger. I finished my chicken and put the plate in the sink. The phone was buzzing incessantly now, a furious insect on my couch. I picked it up and saw a string of missed calls and a dozen new messages. From my father. The car insurance company called. They said my policy was canceled for non-payment 5 days ago. Do you know what this means? I can't drive. I could be arrested. From Lucas. What the hell, Cam? I just got an email from Michael's daycare. Payment declined. They said he can't come back on Monday until the account is settled. Are you broke? Did you lose your job? What is happening? From Emily. My landlord is threatening to sue me. He says I'm in breach of contract. This is my career, Camila. My entire career. They were all spiraling. Their individual worlds, once safely propped up by my silent support, were collapsing simultaneously. And their first, second, and only thought was to blame me. It was not, did we forget to handle our own responsibilities? It was, what did Camila do wrong? I had been so effective as their safety net that they did not know how to function without it. They had forgotten how to fall. Now they were in free fall, furious with me for not being there to catch them. I read each message with a strange detachment. It felt like reading a patient's chart. I could see the symptoms. I understood the diagnosis. But the emotional contagion that used to overwhelm me was gone. Their panic was theirs. Their chaos was theirs. Their consequences were finally theirs. It was not my emergency. The final voicemail of the evening came from my mother. Her voice was no longer angry. It was cold, laced with venomous fury that was far more chilling. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, Camila, but I know one thing. After today, after you have deliberately and maliciously ruined this holiday for your entire family, you are no longer welcome in this house. You have made your choice. The line went dead. I stood in my quiet kitchen, the only light coming from the television in the other room. You have made your choice. She was right. I had. I chose the quiet of my own apartment over the noise of their expectations. I chose my own well-being over their comfort. I chose myself. I picked up my phone, but not to call them back. I opened my contacts list, found the group chat titled Family, and pressed delete, and exit conversation. Then one by one, I blocked their numbers. Mom, Dad, Lucas, Emily. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of presence. The presence of my own life waiting to be lived. For the first time, their chaos was not mine to fix. And that felt more peaceful than any Thanksgiving I could remember. A week of perfect, uninterrupted silence passed. It was a revelation. I learned that my shoulders were not naturally tense. They had been held that way for years, braced for the next incoming call, the next demand, the next emergency that somehow always belonged to me. In the quiet, they began to relax. I slept through the night without waking at 3 a.m. to the phantom buzz of my phone. I went to work. I came home. The time in between was entirely my own. The silence from my family was not a punishment. It was a gift. It was the sound of my own life beginning. The peace was shattered the following Thursday. It was just after 7 in the evening. I was home from a shift, still in my scrubs, when loud, insistent banging started at my apartment door. It was not a polite knock. It was an angry, demanding summons. I knew instantly who it was. My building had a security entrance. Only someone who had been let in or knew the code could get to my floor. I looked through the peephole and my stomach clenched. Lucas and Emily stood in the hallway, their faces grim and set. Lucas looked as if he was about to kick the door down. Emily stood slightly behind him with her arms crossed, her expression a mask of righteous indignation. They looked like a delegation sent from a fallen kingdom to demand the return of their queen. Or, more accurately, their court jester and treasury. For a moment I considered not answering. I could stand there in the safety of my apartment until they gave up and went away, but I knew they would not. And more than that, I realized I was no longer afraid. The fear of their disapproval, their anger and their withdrawal had been the cage I lived in for 30 years. I had spent a week outside that cage. I was not going back in. I took a deep breath, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door. I did not open it all the way, only enough to block the entrance with my body. I leaned against the doorframe, my expression calm. "Hello, Lucas." "Emily, are you out of your mind?" Lucas started, his voice a low growl. He tried to push past me into the apartment, but I did not move. "What the hell are you doing?" "She's punishing us," Emily cut in, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Because of one little joke. One joke. And you decide to blow up the entire family? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked from her tear-streaked, furious face to my brother's tense, angry one. A strange calm settled over me. They were loud. They were emotional. I was none of those things. "I know exactly what I've done," I said evenly. "I've stopped paying your bills." The bluntness of the statement stunned them into a brief silence. They had prepared for a fight. They had prepared for tears. They had prepared for a screaming match. They were not prepared for simple, undeniable facts. Lucas recovered first, shifting tactics from anger to condescending reason, the same voice he probably used on clients. "Look, Cammy, we're family. We help each other out. That's what families do. If you were having money problems, you should have just said something. We could have worked it out, made a budget." The hypocrisy was so astounding that it was almost funny. Lucas was going to lecture me about a budget. "You're right," I said, my voice still quiet. "Families do help each other. But what we were doing wasn't help. Help is temporary. Help is a two-way street. This was a system of dependency. My dependency was my money. Your dependency was everything else. That isn't family. That's not fair," Emily cried. "You have a good job. You have all this money saved up. I'm a struggling artist. You know how hard it is for me? You offered to help." "I offered to help you get started," I corrected gently. "I did not offer to fund your entire life indefinitely. There is a difference." "You are punishing the whole family," Lucas repeated, his voice rising again. "Mom and Dad are a mess. Dad can't drive to work. Their house is freezing cold, all because your feelings got hurt." He said feelings like it was something dirty. That was the core of their argument. My feelings, my dignity, my very existence were trivial things that should never have been allowed to inconvenience them. My pain was a luxury tax they were unwilling to pay. "My feelings didn't just get hurt, Lucas," I said. For the first time, a sliver of the cold fire I had felt at the restaurant crept into my voice. "Mom wished I had never been born. And you all laughed. You laughed at the idea of me not existing. You cannot trivialize that. You don't get to." They had no response. They simply stared at me. It was clear they had hoped this would be a simple matter of bullying me back into submission. They were realizing it would not be. I held up a hand. "Wait here a moment." I closed the door, leaving them in the hallway. Then I walked to my desk and picked up the thick manila envelope I had prepared days earlier. Inside were copies. Copies of everything. Bank statements showing the mortgage payments, utility bills, Venmo history to Emily, daycare payment confirmations for Lucas, insurance records. 3 years of their lives paid for by me, printed in black and white. I opened the door again. They looked startled, as if they had thought I had locked them out for good. I held out the heavy envelope to Lucas. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You said I'm punishing the family," I said, my voice soft again, the fire gone and replaced by a profound, weary finality. "No. I'm stopping the punishment of me." I looked straight into his eyes. Lucas opened the clasp and pulled out the first few pages. It was a summary sheet I had created with each of their names and a grand total beside it. I watched his eyes scan the numbers. I watched the color drain from his face. He fumbled with the papers, and a few of Emily's Venmo receipts fluttered to the floor. She bent to pick one up and froze, staring at her own words printed on the page. "Gallery lights. You're a lifesaver." They looked up at me, their faces pale. The smugness and anger were gone. In their place was raw, naked panic. It was the look of people who had not only been caught, but had been forced to see the full scale of their own hypocrisy. They had no comeback. There was nothing to say. The numbers did not lie. The proof was in their hands. "I think you should go now," I said quietly. They did not argue. Lucas, clutching the envelope like evidence in a crime, simply nodded. He could not meet my eyes. Emily looked at me with her mouth slightly open, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. They turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevator, their footsteps suddenly heavy and slow. I closed my door. I locked the deadbolt. Then I leaned against it. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I only felt quiet. The showdown was over. There were no winners or losers. There was only the truth laid bare on a stack of photocopied paper. And there was me, on the other side of a locked door, finally and irrevocably free. The silence that followed the showdown was different. It was no longer a temporary peace. It was a permanent state of being. The silence of a severed connection. A clean and final cut. In that quiet, I realized that staying in the city only 20 minutes away from the wreckage of my old life was impossible. I would always be looking over my shoulder. I would always be braced for another confrontation, another attempt to pull me back into their orbit. To truly be free, I had to truly leave. Once the decision was made, it felt liberating. It was the first major life choice I had ever made entirely for myself, without considering their needs, their opinions, or their proximity. I started looking for nursing jobs in other states, focusing on places I had always wanted to see. The mountains of Colorado, the coastline of Oregon. I sent out applications with a polished, professional resume. Within a month, I had 3 offers. One from a major hospital in Portland, Oregon was particularly appealing. It was a position in the pediatric ICU, a challenging new field for me. It came with a significant pay raise and a generous relocation bonus. I accepted without a second thought. The process of moving became my singular focus. I sold my furniture. I packed my essential belongings into a dozen carefully labeled boxes. I put in my notice at St. Jude's and at my apartment complex. Each task was a step away from the old Camila, the responsible one, the invisible one. Each box I sealed felt like a nail in the coffin of that life. There were moments of fear, of course. The night before the movers were scheduled to arrive, I sat on the floor of my empty apartment. The echo of my own breathing sounded loud in the space. A wave of loneliness washed over me, so intense it was dizzying. I was leaving everything I had ever known. I was walking away from my entire family. What if I was making a terrible mistake? What if I ended up completely alone 1,000 miles away? Then I thought of the restaurant. I thought of their laughter. I thought of the heavy silence in the hallway after Lucas and Emily saw the contents of the envelope. And I knew loneliness was not simply being alone. Loneliness was being in a room full of people who did not see you. Solitude, the state I was choosing, was different. Solitude was an opportunity to finally meet myself. The move to Portland was a rebirth. The air was different, clean and smelling of pine and rain. My new apartment was smaller than my old one, but it had a large balcony with a view of Mount Hood in the distance. I bought a new fiddle-leaf fig tree and placed it in a sunny corner. My new job was demanding, but deeply rewarding. In the pediatric ICU, my confidence and calm demeanor were not just appreciated, they were vital. I was part of a team that respected my skills and valued my input. My charge nurse would say things like, "Good catch, Camilla," or "I need your eyes on this." I was visible. I was essential. I started to carry myself differently, shoulders back, head held high. The timid, accommodating woman who had been terrified of making waves was being replaced by a confident professional who knew her own worth. Slowly and cautiously, I began to build a life. Remembering my childhood love for science and nature, I joined a local hiking group I found online. The first time I went, I was nervous, a stranger among a group of seasoned friends. But they were welcoming and kind. They asked me questions about my life. When I gave them the vague, edited version that I had moved for a job and wanted a change of scenery, they accepted it without prying. On a trail that wound through a forest of towering Douglas firs, a woman named Sarah asked me about my work. I told her about a particularly tough case, a little boy who had finally been able to go home after weeks on a ventilator. She listened with genuine interest and compassion in her eyes. "That must be so incredibly difficult," she said, "but so rewarding. You must be very strong." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. No one in my family had ever called me strong as a compliment. To them, my strength was just a resource, a thing to be used. To this stranger on a hiking trail, it was a quality to be admired. I felt a lump form in my throat. For the first time in a long time, it came from gratitude, not grief. I started taking weekends for myself. I drove to the coast to watch waves crash against rocks. I explored the city's famous bookstores. I drank coffee slowly without checking my phone every 30 seconds. The silence from my family became a background hum, then a whisper. Eventually, it faded away completely. It was not painful anymore. It was not lonely. It was peace. One day, about a year after I moved, I was sitting in a cafe and saw a family at a nearby table that reminded me of them. A domineering mother, a passive father, a loud, favored son, a quiet daughter who seemed to shrink in her chair. I watched them, but I did not feel the familiar sting of anger or sadness. I felt a strange, detached pity. I saw them for what they were, a deeply broken system that required a scapegoat to function. Their jokes, their praise for the golden children, their dismissal of the quiet one, all of it was a carefully constructed performance to avoid looking at their own failures. Without me to absorb the dysfunction, fix the problems, and be the butt of the jokes, my family's perfect little unit would have to find a new target. I suspected they were turning on each other now. The jokes were probably not so funny when there was no one left to laugh but themselves. I finished my coffee, left a tip, and walked out into the cool Portland air. I had not defeated them. I had simply resigned from the game, and in doing so, I had finally won back my own life. 2 years have passed since I left. I am still in Portland. My fiddle-leaf fig tree is thriving, its big, waxy leaves reaching toward the ceiling. My life is quiet, but it is a rich and fulfilling quiet. It is filled with the laughter of new friends, the challenge of a career I love, and the profound peace of waking up in the morning knowing that my day belongs only to me. I never heard from my family again after that day in the hallway. No angry calls, no letters, no attempts at an apology. Their silence was the final confirmation of the truth. I had only been valuable to them as long as I was useful. Once the services were canceled, so was I. There was a time when that realization would have shattered me. Now it is simply a fact. An old diagnosis in a chart from a life that no longer feels like mine. I have forgiven them, but not for them. I forgave them in the quiet of my own heart as a final act of letting go, releasing the poison so I could fully heal. Forgiveness for me did not mean reconciliation. It did not mean returning to their table and pretending their laughter had not torn me apart. It simply meant I no longer allowed them to occupy space in my heart or in my head. I granted their wish. The Camila they knew, the one who existed only to serve them, was truly never born again. I built a new life, not from scratch, but from the strong foundation that had been there all along, the foundation they had taken for granted. My resilience, my competence, my compassion. Those were not flaws to exploit. They were strengths to celebrate. My mother once wished I had never been born. In a way, I granted that wish. I removed the daughter they had created, the one who was a function and not a person. By disappearing from their lives, I finally allowed myself to be born into my own. Sometimes absence is not defeat. It is freedom. It is the ultimate act of choosing yourself. If you have ever been dismissed, minimized, or made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to see you most clearly, remember this. No is a full sentence. Your worth is not determined by your usefulness to others. Respect should always come before obligation. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop proving your value to people who only loved what they could take from you.